Tennessee's at-home learning series for literacy. Today's lesson is for all our 6th graders out there, though all children are welcome to tune in. This is the 3rd lesson in our series. My name is Megan Gilly, and I am a 6th grade teacher in Tennessee schools. I'm so excited to be your teacher for today's lesson. Welcome to my virtual classroom. Today, we're going to continue learning about the Middle Ages, but we're going to focus on the characteristics of knights during the Middle Ages. Before we get started, to fully participate in our lesson today, you will need 2 pieces of paper, a pen or a pencil, a firm surface to write on, and if you were with us yesterday, the chart that you created. If you missed our previous lessons, you can find it on the Tennessee Department of Education's website using the link on the screen. You can go to www.tn.gov/education. You can still tune in to today's lesson, of course, if you haven't seen any of our others, but it might be more fun if you go back and watch our other lessons, since we'll be learning about things that we learned previously and build on that knowledge. We will continue to create the chart today using interesting facts and events that we learn about the Middle Ages. So be sure that you have it and something to write with, and we're going to get started. Remember that even though we are learning about the Middle Ages, we are thinking about how we can develop ourselves as readers. As we read, we're going to continue to cite evidence to support our thinking from the text. We're going to analyze key individuals. Today we're going to be looking at knights as they're developed in the text. And we'll of course continue to develop our vocabulary as it pertains to the Middle Ages. In the end, we're going to write, because as writers, we want to take all the information that we learned and be able to compile it into a paragraph. We're going to inform our readers today about the similarities and differences in knights and professional athletes today, specifically baseball players. So let's go back to day 1. During our first lesson, we focused on how the Roman Empire changed under Charles the Great and formed Europe during the Middle Ages. We learned about 5 new countries that made up the new Europe: England, France, Spain, Germany, and Italy. Changes began to occur under Charlemagne's government system called feudalism. Remember, feudalism focuses on land ownership, which created the rich and the poor. Yesterday, we learned about lords and serfs and how their lives were definitely different. Lords had more opportunities and power than serfs did. In addition, we learned that the Middle Ages were violent times and lords were required to protect their land. When they did, they used people called, do you remember if you were here with us yesterday? They were freemen. So today we're going to investigate knights and their role during the Middle Ages. Knights were hired by lords for protection during these violent times. So let's start reading and become historians and investigators. I have my highlighter ready so that when we go to look at questions, I can highlight the evidence as I find the answer in the text. So I want you to be thinking about, during this section, why people fought during the Middle Ages. Whether rich or poor, young men in the Middle Ages learned how to use a weapon of some kind. Rivalries between nobles, wars with other nations, even violence between neighbors required that they be able to fight. When a lord needed to raise an army, he turned to those he governed. In the Middle Ages, ordinary foot soldiers were trained to fight with an axe and a long spear called a spike or a pike. Others were trained to be skillful archers and crossbowmen. Some foot soldiers might have worn chainmail, an early form of metal armor, but most had padded coats and carried daggers. However, the most esteemed soldiers were knights. So let's be thinking about what questions we have. What was happening in the Middle Ages that often required young men to become fighters. And I'm going to pick up my highlighter here and think about, why would young men have to fight? And I see here in the text, it tells us that rivalries between nobles, wars with other nations, even when violence between neighbors required that they be able to fight. So that's right, there were rivalries between these groups. So I wonder, what are rivalries? Do you know what that is? Think about it. Rivalries is a noun, and it means competitions or conflicts. For example, if you have a sibling at home, you might have what we call a sibling rivalry, where there's conflict or confrontation between the two. Let's learn more about the different soldiers in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, ordinary foot soldiers were trained to fight with an axe and a long spear called a pike. Others were trained to be skillful archers and crossbowmen. Some foot soldiers might have worn chainmail, an early form of metal armor, but most had padded coats and carried daggers. However, the most esteemed soldiers were knights. Okay, readers, we'll see in that last sentence it says the most esteemed soldiers were knights. What do we think that the word esteemed means in the text? Based on the details I have, I think you're right too. Esteemed means highly respected or highly regarded. Based on that, I want you to determine whether a knight is higher or lower than a serf in the feudal system. Well, if we have that word esteemed, that means to me that they're probably higher than a serf in the feudal system. So let's continue, readers. Let's continue with the characteristics of knights. Knights were soldiers who fought on horseback and sometimes on foot for their lord. If you wanted to be a knight, you had to be able to afford horses and armor. You also had to find someone willing to train you. Because it was very expensive to become a knight, these mounted warriors were usually sons of wealthy, influential members of society. Being a knight was one way of making a fortune. If you were involved in successful battles and wars, you might receive money or land as payment for your services. Sometimes a king might also reward you with a title. Having a title usually meant that you were an influential member of society. Knights also made money by looting and by holding certain people for ransom. Wow, that's a lot of information about knights. So I want us to be thinking about, is a knight usually a serf or a lord? Think about that for just a moment. And consider that a knight rode a horse, and knights had to be rich enough to pay for the horse and armor. So I would be thinking, well, from what I remember about serfs, I definitely think that they had to be more like a lord, because you can see here in the text that it says it was very expensive to become a knight, and that they were usually sons of wealthy, influential members of society. And we know that that is a characteristic of lords as well. If a knight is successful, what are some of the things a knight can receive? Well, in the text I see that sometimes they might receive money or land as payment for the services. Sometimes a king might also reward a knight with a title. And I also see that knights made money by looting and holding certain people for ransom. So again, I want you to be thinking about, based on these details, is a knight higher or lower than a serf in the feudal system? Let me think about that. They're higher. And again, to be influential as it's used up here in the text, is somebody that is able to make an impact on other people. I want you to think about what is one of the things about knights that surprises you. You know, I wonder about that last detail there, that knights made money by looting and by holding certain people for ransom. So let's find out more about what it was like to be a knight in the Middle Ages. Your training to become a knight begins at a young age. You leave home to live with a family friend or a relative who has agreed to train you. In the first several years of your training, you help to dress and to serve the Lord. You are known as a page. During these early years as an aspiring knight, you probably learn to use a sword, to ride a horse, and to wield a lance or long wooden pole with a metal tip. Later, when you are ready to learn more challenging skills, you become a squire. Although you are still responsible for grooming and saddling the Lord's horses, you are also more responsible for cleaning and polishing his armor. You learn how to fight while riding a horse. You learn to use other weapons, including a heavier lance. This is part of your training that lasts for several years. Based on the way it's used in this paragraph, what do you think the word aspiring means? And I'm going to take my pen and circle that word so you can see where it's being used in the text. During these early years as an aspiring knight. Have you ever aspired to do anything? I've aspired to be a piano player. It means that they were probably hoping to become a knight. I personally was always hoping to become a piano player. So you put in really hard work. I also want you to think about the differences between a page and a squire. In the text, both terms were used. Here we have a page, where the green is over the word, and a squire is down here. I want us to think about what were the differences. You know, it started where a page has a little less responsibility than a squire. Squires have more responsibility, and we can see that with the evidence from the text. As a squire, you are now responsible for grooming and saddling the Lord's horses. You're also responsible for cleaning and polishing his armor. You learn how to fight while riding a horse. You use other weapons, including a heavier lance. It seems to me like a squire has a more challenging position. So this particular part of the text really details the steps that it takes to become a knight. So in this next section, I want you to pull out a piece of paper and a pen or pencil to take some notes. And while I have some of the notes already filled out, I want you to follow along with me. And I'm going to talk through each of these steps as it was shown in the text for how knights come to be. So again, we're jotting down the steps. And when we think of jotting steps, a good method of note-taking is using boxes and arrows. So, steps to become a knight. You can see box 1 says, well, first, they had to leave their homes at a young age. This prepared them because it took many years to become a knight. So they had to start at an early age. So you'll see I have the word first. So I want you to copy that on your piece of paper with a box around it. And like I said, a good note-taking strategy when we do steps and we want to show an order is to use boxes and arrows. So first, they left their homes at a young age. The arrow means then, meaning next. What did they do? So I'm going to say, well, second, what they did based on the section we just read is that they learned to use a sword, ride a horse, and wield a lance. And if I remember correctly as a reader, there was a word that described the responsibilities of this kind of person. They had to become this before moving up. And if you are thinking of the word that starts with a P, it is the word page. So a knight had to become a page next. And lastly, you can see that we go on to the next step. Third, they learned to fight while riding a horse and carrying a heavier lance. Well, there was another name for those particular knights in this step. They went from leaving their homes, they became a page, and then, what next? You're right, they become a squire. So when we put that here, I just want to add that so I can recall the different steps pretty easily. They had different responsibilities and challenges. We'll continue learning about the characteristics of knights as we move on. You're all experts, but there's more to learn. When we become a squire, if you are a successful squire, you might be knighted by the Lord. In what is called a dubbing ceremony, the Lord taps you on the shoulder with the flat part of his sword. Then a priest might bless you with a prayer. And I'm thinking about, well, interesting. What was the purpose of the dubbing ceremony and what took place during it? So again, I can see on the text, well, what was the purpose? Well, of course, to become a knight. I wanted to officially become a knight is what this text is talking about. Not me specifically, but the knights at the time. And I think about, well, what took place during it? Pretty interesting. The Lord taps you on the shoulder with the flat part of his sword, and then a priest might bless you with a prayer. So I can see in the text that the sentences support what happened during a dubbing ceremony. Let's talk a little bit further about the expectations of a knight. We've learned quite a bit already, but in France in the 1100s and 1200s, certain expectations about how knights should behave in society were developed. The term chivalry, which refers to a warrior, horseman, or knight, became the term used to describe these expectations. These ideas of chivalry spread to other European countries. Knights were expected to serve their lord. They were required to honor and protect the church and weaker members of society. They were also expected to treat other knights captured in battle as honored guests until a ransom was received. Sometimes it took months before a captured knight's family paid up. Once payment was received, the captured knight was free to go home. And I'm thinking first about this word chivalry. We come across it in the text, and let me highlight or put a circle around it, chivalry. And I'm wondering to myself, well, what is that word? You're right. Chivalry refers to the way that the knights were expected to behave. Okay, so how knights should behave was referred to as chivalry. And it's there again in the text 2 different times. So I'm thinking, well, how were the knights expected to behave? What details does it tell us? Can you find it? Can you find the expectations of knights? That's right. Knights were expected to honor and protect church and weaker members of society. The knights were expected to treat other knights captured in battle as honored guests until a ransom was received. And it also says the captured knight, where did it go? Oh, they were expected, I missed it, to serve their Lord. So you can see there's 3 different details that we have here. And the way that I know those are expectations is because it even uses the word expected. Expected. They were required to honor. Those are clues that let me know that's how they were expected to behave. Let's continue on. Knights could prove their strength and abilities by taking part in jousting matches. You might have heard that before. Jousting matches were mock or pretend battles between 2 or more knights. Knights rode horses, wore full armor, and they carried lances. Those who took part in jousts did so to gain respect and possibly a generous prize. For the privileged, attending the jousting matches was considered to be a day of excitement and entertainment. It was very much like watching a football or baseball game today. When the joust began, the knights charged at each other, and with the aid of the lance, each knight attempted to knock his opponent off of his horse. Why would a knight take part in a jousting match? Think about that. Why would they want to take part in that? Why would somebody want to fight for fun? Well, we do that a lot in society when it comes to sports. And I guess that a knight would want to be able to prove his strength, just like some of the sports that we watch today. Because it did say in the text that they would gain the respect and possibly earn a generous prize. So that might be why they would want to take part. And I want you to think about not only the knights and why they would want to be there, but think about how did the spectators who went there feel about attending? And think about how you feel when you might go to a sports game. Were you here you're going to go watch the Predators play? Or the Tennessee Volunteers? You're right. For the privileged, attending the jousting matches was just considered to be a day of excitement and entertainment. So let's continue. Underneath our notes, we're going to be creating a 2-column chart to consider how were knights similar to our professional athletes that we have today. And even though it says professional athletes on your screen, we're actually going to take a look at baseball players. And even if you don't quite understand the game of baseball, that's okay, because I think you could really think about the details still. So I want you to make a T-chart on the bottom of your page, just like I have, and you're going to split the left-hand side with knights, and on the right-hand side, you're going to put professional athletes. I want us to be thinking about the details of how are knights similar and how are knights different. Let me think about that. I want you to think too for just a moment. How are they similar and how are they different? Okay, we're going to go ahead and start. On the left-hand side, when I think about knights, I think about how they began training at a really young, early age. In addition, because they had left early, it gave them the opportunity to be able to start learning their skill young. And so they did have different levels of training. Remember that they went from a page to a squire, and then they were finally knighted. Being a knight was dangerous, but it was rewarding. So you can jot that one down too. Thinking about how when we were reading it, came across that knights made money by winning battles, looting, kidnapping, and earning titles. So it was rewarding for them, kind of like we said. Yes, it was dangerous, but here were some of the rewards as to why they would want to do it. They'd earn titles. I also think about, well, they fought as a sport. Why? Because it showed strength to their spectators. And when I think about professional athletes, specifically baseball players, I'm like, well, based on what I have on the left-hand side, I know knights began training at an early age, and I wonder, do baseball players start training at an early age? They do. So I think that that is a similarity that they have. They begin training at an early age too. I think about my brother who started T-ball really young, which brings me into the next point. I see that on the left, knights had different levels of training. Well, so do baseball players. They start at T-ball when they're super young. They might play competitive or just a rec league. They might play in high school. Then there's the collegiate level and the professional level. So there's different levels of training for baseball players too. In addition, baseball players, they definitely play for fans and they make a great deal of money, but they don't make money in the same way as knights. And they also don't fight in real battles, which is our last key point down there. They don't fight in real battles. And they make money in a different way. So even if you're not done with your chart, that is okay. I want us to, because it's on the next page. So we're going to take this, and you are going to be left with your own task today. Independently, meaning on your own, you are going to be using all this information that we learned. We put it into this chart. And now we're going to take this T-chart, and I want you to use it to write a paragraph. And your job today is to create a paragraph that shows the similarities and differences between knights and professional baseball players. Really strong writers can take those key important details and put them into a well-structured paragraph or essay. But today we're just writing a paragraph. And that's okay if you don't know where to start. And it's also okay if you are like, well, I think I want to write two separate paragraphs, one that shows the similarities and one that shows the differences. That's okay. You can challenge yourself in any way that you would like. But for those of you who might be stuck, you can use on the screen, I've just uploaded a sentence/paragraph starter for you. And this would be a really good guide for you to use by structuring your paragraph in this way. So if you want to take a picture of the screen or go out to Tennessee's website, Department of Education, and you can come back to this lesson to be able to get that information and pause the screen. That's a really great idea too. We have little time left today, but I really enjoyed learning about knights with you in the Middle Ages. Thank you for inviting me into your home. Again, I challenge you to continue your independent task on your own, but I look forward to seeing you in our next lesson in Tennessee's at-home learning series for literacy. Have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you for the next lesson.